Part 57. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fay. Chapter 576. Chapter 562. The patient who disobeys the doctor's advice. Ji Yunchu saw this and hurriedly shouted, "Ajiu! Her current physical condition is not suitable for impulsiveness." However, Li Ju had already opened the door and left and could not hear her words. Ji Yunchu frowned and looked back at everyone. "What are you still doing? Hurry up and follow. She is now a time bomb. It will explode somewhere. If she loses control of her mental power in any public place, it will be an unimaginable disaster." Li Ju had a cold expression on his face, and the pressure in his body was extremely low. He kept calling Chi Sijin and others, but naturally no one answered. "Damn it!" She smashed the steering wheel angrily, cursed fiercely, and called Li Chen instead. "Dad, has Grandpa contacted you?" Li Chen was busy at first, so when he saw the call from her, he thought it was something important. Who would have thought that she would ask such an inconsistent question, and her tone sounded quite urgent. He was stunned for a moment, then came back to his senses and said, "No, didn't he take Makino to the Yun family to celebrate his birthday?" Li Ju's eyes became darker. "Brother Makino is here too." "Well, he said he wanted to join in the fun." Li Chen raised his head and glanced at the time, raising his eyebrows slightly, feeling a little strange. Logically speaking, they should be back at this time. "Xiaju, what happened?" Li Chen asked with a frown. For some reason, he suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. Li Ju's tone calmed down. "It's okay, Dad, I have something else to do, so I'll hang up first." After saying that, before Li Chen could reply, he cut off the call. Then he stepped on the accelerator suddenly, and the car suddenly flew out like an arrow, leaving only a trace of exhaust gas. Li Ju stared straight ahead without blinking, and drove the car to the extreme speed without changing her expression. If you observe carefully, you will find that there is a raging anger in her eyes, and she looks like a storm is about to come. Suddenly, she glanced at the rearview mirror. Several cars appeared one after another behind her car, neatly lined up, and followed closely behind her. "That is Ji Yunchu and others." Li Ju looked back and suddenly turned the steering wheel to the end, making a sharp turn. Behind her, Ji Yunchu also immediately swung the steering wheel, and the car suddenly slid into a curve on the road. Ning Feng, who was in the passenger seat, was almost thrown out. His hands were firmly grasping the seat belt, and his body was pressed against the seat due to inertia. He collapsed and said, "Seventh sister. Can't you drive more steadily?" Ji Yunchu said impatiently, "Shut up, I don't even have a driver's license, how stable do you expect me to be?" Ning Feng's eyes were horrified, and his voice suddenly broke, "How dare you hit the road without a driver's license? If you are caught, you will not be able to escape proper detention. What's more, she is still racing." Ning Feng suddenly felt that his life was in danger. Ji Yunchu said irritably, "Don't disturb me, or get out of here." Seeing that her expression was getting irritable, Ning Feng was very aware of current affairs and immediately became as quiet as a chicken. Seeing that Li Ju was falling further and further away, Ji Yunchu finally couldn't help but cursed, "Damn it! How old are you? Why are you still so impulsive? Don't you know what's going on with your body?" In situations like Li Ju's, one must stay calm at all times, otherwise emotional agitation will more easily lead to mental riots. She has said this 1,000 times, but every time she is ignored by this person, and the next time she does it her own way. Ji Yunchu's eyes flashed with displeasure. The biggest headache is patients who don't follow the doctor's advice. She rarely loses her temper, but that doesn't mean she has no temper. Those in the team who were lucky enough to see her get angry once understood a very clear truth after that: never mess with the ghost doctor. But now, Li Ju was simply jumping back and forth on her minefield, making her teeth itchy with anger but helpless. After all, she can't beat him. Ningfeng watched tremblingly as the familiar devilish smile gradually appeared on Ji Yunchu's face. His eyelids twitched and his whole body tensed to the extreme. He asked cautiously, Seventh sister, has the boss made you angry again? Otherwise, how could she have this expression? Ji Yunchu turned around and gave him a flawless smile. What do you think? Ningfeng. He felt that she was not in a good mood, and the boss might be finished after getting off the car. Driving without a license is not advisable. This article is purely fictitious. Do not imitate it. Driving is irregular. My relatives will cry. Keep it in your heart and read it twice every time. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 577. Chapter 563, Erase the Traces. Yun family. The banquet hall was in a mess. The guests who were chatting and laughing just now were stunned. There were broken glass everywhere and red wine and cakes spilled all over the floor. There were only 3 people standing there, Mr. Yun, Yun Rong and Yun Yin. Just 10 minutes ago, Lin Yan, who couldn't find anything out from the 2 old men, had completely lost his patience. He immediately stunned Mr. Li and others and took them away from the Yun family without knowing it. Before leaving, he glanced at Mr. Yun coldly and said, I'll leave it to you to deal with the aftermath. I don't want any to bother me. Mr. Yun smiled apologetically, don't worry, I will never let anyone know about you. After they left, Yun Rong straightened the folds of his dress, glanced at the people lying on the ground, frowned and asked, Grandpa, are they not dead? Just before Lin Yan left, he ordered his men to inject everyone with something, and then they all fainted. If they all died here, it would bring a lot of trouble to the Yun family. It's hard for the police to explain. Mr. Yun waved his hand, it's okay, it will just make them lose their memory temporarily. After all, as onlookers, they witnessed the whole process of the Yun family's participation in the kidnapping of Mr. Li and Mr. Qi. If the memory was not erased, he would be in more trouble. Hearing this, Yun Yin frowned, then, what will the police say when they come? It's enough for a person to be so frightened that he loses his mind and cannot remember what happened, but everyone is like this, so he will definitely suspect that there is something fishy going on. Mr. Yun pondered. Mr. Lin said that the drug injected into them will only cause them to temporarily lose their memory. After the drug gradually takes effect, it will penetrate deep into their brains and artificially tamper with some memories. At that time, we want them to whatever they say, they have to say it. Yun Rong wondered, there is such a magical thing in this world. She had never heard of this drug, let alone seen it. Since I met Lin Yan, not only has my physical condition improved greatly, but I have also been exposed to a life that I had never experienced before. This experience made her happy and proud, giving her a sense of superiority over others. What she saw was a world that they would never be exposed to in this life. Mr. Yun smiled and said, nothing, girl, you will have the opportunity to come into contact with more things you have never seen before. Now that the Yun family has officially joined the Cha League, assisting them in capturing Mr. Li, Mr. Qi and others, this time can be regarded as the certificate of submission for the Yun family to enter the Cha League. From now on, the Yun family has already had a presence in the Cha League. Once you gain status, you no longer need to act based on other people's opinions. Mr. Yun snorted coldly in his heart and said, it's getting late. Hurry up and arrange the scene as Mr. Lin said, lest the police come and see the flaw. Good. Yes. The 3 people began to act separately and erase the traces left by Lin Yan according to the plan. At this time, Li Ju drove the car very fast and suddenly stepped on the brakes. The tires scraped against the ground and made a screeching sound. The steady car immediately stopped at the door of Yun's house. She pushed the door open and got out of the car. Before she could turn around, she was blocked by Ji Yunchu, who had been following closely behind. Ji Yunchu was slightly panting. In order to catch up with her, he first drove all the way, then quickly got out of the car and ran over to hug her. He had not been on a mission for a long time, and his physical fitness was indeed not used to it, but it was okay. He didn't look like someone when he got off the car. So I found a corner and vomited non-stop. Her eyes glanced imperceptibly at Ningfen not far away. He was holding onto the trunk of a tree and vomiting to the sky. The scene was too horrible to watch. He vowed never to ride in a car driven by Ji Yunchu again in his life. Ji Yunchu twitched the corner of his mouth and looked back at Li Ju. "Ajiu, calm down, be careful." Li Ju raised her hand to interrupt her next words. "I know, it's okay." "What's the matter? Are you a doctor or am I a doctor? Don't be brave." Li Ju finally raised her eyes. The coldness in her eyes shocked even her. She said, "The most important thing now is my grandpa. Step aside." She pushed Ji Yunchu away and walked straight into Yun's house. Ji Yunchu looked at her and was stunned for a moment. He was so worried about Li Ju's situation that he didn't realize that it was the Yun family she was coming to. Looking at the extremely familiar yet unfamiliar building in front of her, she suddenly narrowed her eyes, and a coldness flashed across her eyes. What kind of trouble is this family planning to cause? End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 578. Chapter 564. Where is my grandfather? The door was kicked open, hit the wall and bounced back. Li Ju's face was cold, with a violent aura lingering around him. His eyes swept across the mess on the ground sternly, and finally fell on Mr. Yun and others, narrowing his eyes dangerously. Mr. Yun and the three of them did not expect that someone would suddenly break in, and they were all shocked. Due to guilty conscience, the three of them all raised their eyebrows at the same time. Their eyes wandered for a moment, but they were accurately captured by Li Ju. Mr. Yun subconsciously asked, "Who are you?" Li Ju sneered, and in a flash, he came to him at a speed that ordinary people could not see clearly. He grabbed his throat, his eyes were stern and cold, and the strength of his hands suddenly tightened. Mr. Yun suddenly stared. His eyes were big, and all the veins on his neck were popping out. Well dash. Facing the sudden feeling of suffocation, he was not prepared at all. He subconsciously stretched out his hand to pull at the arm she was holding onto him, but the strength was too weak and resistance was useless. "Grandfather! Dad!" Yun Rong and Yun Yin screamed at the same time, rushing forward desperately to save Mr. Yun, but for some reason, they seemed to be ejected by an invisible barrier before they reached Li Ju. The bodies of mother and daughter flew out in the same posture and fell heavily to the ground, making two muffled sounds. Huge pain swept through him, as if his body was broken into two pieces from the middle, and he was so painful that he couldn't breathe. Even though Yun Rong has been treated by Kameng and is now mostly healed, the chronic illness left over the years cannot be eliminated in a day or two, and her physique is much weaker than that of a normal person. With such a fall, she was knocked unconscious on the spot. Not far away from her, Yun Yin struggled to get up despite the severe pain, but fell back again. She said anxiously, "Wrong-er." However, there was no reply. The other party was extremely dizzy. She gritted her teeth and looked at Li Ju angrily, her voice sharp and full of venom, "You bitch." At this moment, Li Ju kicked open the half-open door, and people pushed it open again. Ji Yunchu and Ningfeng walked in one after another. Ningfeng's face looked slightly pale. He had almost vomited out everything he had eaten today and yesterday. The artist is very strict about his physical appearance. He rarely eats at ordinary times. After vomiting like this, there is nothing left in his stomach. He looks listless. He just follows Ji Yunshu languidly and has no time to pay attention to the surrounding situation. Unexpectedly, Ji Yunshu in front stopped suddenly, and he almost ran into him without stopping. He raised his head helplessly, "You." The next second, the words were not finished in the throat. He saw Ji Yunshu suddenly lowered his head. He followed her line of sight and happened to see Yunyan lying on the ground. He was a little surprised and didn't know what was happening here. Ji Yunshu didn't have any trouble in his eyes, and without changing his expression, he directly raised his foot and stepped over. At this time, Yunyan happened to see Ji Yunshu. She seemed to have found the reason instantly. She raised her hand tremblingly and pointed at her angrily, and blasted out vicious and unpleasant words like a barrage. "It turns out to be you. Ji Yunshu. You actually leading someone to do such an outrageous thing to your grandfather." The unbearable curses came into his ears clearly and word by word, but Ji Yunshu didn't react at all. As if he didn't hear it, he walked straight to Li Ju and glanced at Mr. Yun, who was holding his throat by her. He said calmly, "They called the police. The police will be here soon. If you want to ask anything, hurry up." Li Ju hummed, loosened the strength in his hand, and said in a cold and emotionless tone, "Tell me, where is my grandpa?" Mr. Yun said with difficulty, "I don't know who your grandfather is." "I don't know," Li Ju snorted coldly, "I am Li Ju, who do you think my grandfather is?" It turned out to be her. How could Mr. Yun not know about the eldest lady of the Li family who has caused a huge commotion in the imperial capital during this period? His pupils suddenly dilated, a hint of timidity and guilt flashing through his eyes. Why was Lin Yan chasing after Mr. Li as soon as he left? What does she know? No, she cannot be informed of what is happening here. Fortunately, they have cleared almost all traces. Even if the Special Administration Bureau arrived, they would not be able to find any useful clues. I don't know. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 579. Chapter 565. Return to headquarters. These words were like a fuse, completely igniting Li Ju's bottom line. The violent energy surged out of his body, with the fear of destroying everything, and the temperature in the entire banquet hall suddenly dropped to the extreme. A cold chill gathered in her eyes, and a faint purple light flew past. If you didn't look carefully, you couldn't detect it at all. Ningfeng on the side shuddered and took a few steps away in fear. Those of them who have followed Li Ju since childhood have formed a conditioned reflex over the years, that is, if Li Ju looks wrong, they should immediately retreat 3 meters away without hesitation. Because the price of hesitation is probably to be chopped into human-shaped coal on the spot, the kind that smells like paste. The process of developing this kind of conditioned reflex is extremely painful and long. The blood and tears contained in it are not only his contribution, but can even become a history of blood and tears. In short, it was such an unspeakable lesson that allowed him to stay away as soon as he felt something was wrong with Li Ju. Ningfeng stood there, quietly waiting for the scene that would happen next. However, Ji Yunshu intercepted him. She tapped her phone with one hand and put her hand on Li Ju's shoulder, saying, "Ajiu, don't be impulsive. This is not the place to do anything." Li Ju paused and narrowed his eyes, but still stopped. Ji Yunshu's index finger swiped on the screen and the message was sent successfully. He then put the phone away and said, "I have informed all the team members who are still in the imperial capital to take action immediately to track the locations of the 2 old men and the 4th brother. The imperial capital is temporarily unsafe. Why don't we go back to the headquarters first?" On the way here, she had already gone through the whole thing and roughly figured out the other party's intention. Mr. Li and Mr. Qi are the 2 powerful people in the imperial capital, and they are involved in a lot of related forces. What's more, the Li and Qi families have a history of hundreds of years in the imperial capital. During the past 100 years, there have been incidents between the Li and Qi families. There may not be people with superpowers and people from the Special Administration Bureau involved in the matter. Moreover, Ajiu also said before that the association's attitude towards Mr. Lee is also very ambiguous, and there are obviously some obscure things that cannot be told to them. Now, these two key figures involved in the imperial capital's wealthy families, the Special Administration Bureau, and the association were openly abducted by a group of people who had planned it for a long time on the same day and at the same place. There were no flaws in the whole process. If it weren't for Lao San and the fourth brother followed the two old men, it was really impossible for them to react in such a short period of time. This is simply a slap in the face of the Special Administration Bureau, and then a flagrant provocation to the association. Ji Yunchu's eyes darkened. To be able to complete such a thorough and seamless plan and action, I am afraid that the other party has a lot of power in the imperial capital. Moreover, this power is well hidden and has not been discovered by the Special Administration Bureau. Even they, and I didn't notice anything unusual beforehand. The enemy is in the dark and they are in the light. It is not advisable to make too much noise. Li Ju was momentarily overwhelmed by emotions. Now that he heard Ji Yunchu stop, he gradually calmed down. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and tried his best to suppress the murderous intention and destruction in his heart that was about to break through the shackles, word by word. Suddenly asked, "Where is the Special Administration Bureau?" Ji Yunchu, most of the manpower was deployed to rescue Lao Lu before, so I can't take care of this right now, but... What? Ji Yunchu paused and considered. I heard that the first team also showed up this time. I received news that the two old men were in trouble. I think they will arrive soon. Li Ju closed his eyes, remained silent for a moment, and then ordered, "Let the people outside handle the scene well, don't let anyone know that we have been here, and dash." She opened her clear and indifferent eyes and said in a cold tone, "These people will also be brought back to the headquarters together. I want to interrogate them slowly." Good. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 580. Chapter 566. Li Ju and others arrived quietly, and no one knew when they left. Before everyone else arrived, they took the Yun family away without anyone noticing. By the way, we recalled all the team members in Imperial Capital and withdrew to the headquarters together. Hence, whether it was Chi Jinkai, the Special Administrative Bureau, or the police, they all came to nothing. When they arrived, the Yun family had no other clues except the guests who were stunned. While the police were busy sending the unconscious person to the hospital, they urgently began to inspect the scene. While working, the team member in charge raised his head and glanced to the side from time to time, flashing doubts. Even though it was Mr. Chi who was kidnapped this time, and Mr. Chi could be considered a family member of the victim, there was nothing wrong with his presence here. But what was the situation of the group of people who followed him? Why was the captain so respectful when he met them? Doubts are doubts, and this kind of thing is not something that a team member like him can know, so he was just confused for a moment, and then turned around and was busy with the work at hand. However, he is not the only one who has such thoughts. Everyone here has doubts lingering in their minds, but they just don't dare to ask. Third Master, don't worry, there will definitely be clues left. Director Sun wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and said with a dry smile. He stood beside Chi Jinkai tremblingly. His whole body seemed to be enveloped in a suffocating and depressing atmosphere, and he was almost oppressed to the point of being unable to breathe. Horrible. This is the first time I have appeared together with the legendary god Q. Sure enough, the aura of God is not something mortals like them can bear. Due to Baimuo's incident, almost all the main personnel of the Special Administration Bureau were transferred by Zhou Ming. When the news of the accident of the two old men came, it was like a thunderbolt struck his head, and he stayed in place for a long time without closing his jaw. Fortunately, his many years of experience in handling cases prompted him to calm down as quickly as possible, and quickly issued an order to dispatch all the remaining personnel of the Special Administration Bureau. Those who were on leave immediately returned to their posts, united all parties, and worked hard at all costs. Investigate this incident. When he finished all this and was about to sit down and take a breath, the door of the office was kicked open, and then this man appeared in front of him unexpectedly. His face seemed to be covered with a layer of frost, making people shiver from the cold. His eyebrows were cold, and there was a frightening chill in his eyes. The corners of his tightly pursed lips were slightly depressed, and there was an extremely dangerous aura about him. The air pressure in the office plummeted to an extreme. Sunju was holding the enamel teacup and was about to take a sip. He silently put the cup down, feeling uneasy and pushing it further away. Not daring to look directly at this angry man, he stood up immediately, with a shy smile on his face, and said respectfully, Third Master, we have taken emergency action. Do you have any other orders?" As he spoke, he broke into a cold sweat silently in his heart. "What do you think?" Chi Jinkai narrowed his eyes and said in a cold tone, "Sun Ping, I handed over the Special Administration Bureau to you, and this is what you do." Sun Ping was so frightened that he immediately shook his shoulders, rolled his eyes, and considered apologizing. "I'm sorry, Third Master. It was my dereliction of duty this time. I failed to detect the abnormal movements in the imperial capital in advance, which led to today's situation." "I don't need you to review it with me now," Chi Jinkai said sternly. "Do you still need me to remind you what you should do?" Yes, I will investigate it myself." Sun Ping was so frightened that his face turned pale. He staggered and left the office quickly. Chi Jinkai stood there, pressing his forehead as if he had a headache. His eyes were dim and deep, and the aura around him became colder, as if he was brewing his emotions that were about to explode. The old man was kidnapped. Old man Li was kidnapped together with him. He doesn't know how to explain it to Li Ju now, and he can't even imagine her reaction after knowing this. According to her temperament, she would definitely turn the imperial capital upside down regardless of the consequences, and then use extreme methods to force the group of people out. No. Chi Jinkai's eyes turned cold, and he must not let Li Ju get involved in danger. That group of people must be found immediately. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 581. Chapter 567. Is there a problem with the Yun family? Third brother. By the time Bai Yuxiu and Lu Qingran arrived at Yun's house, the investigation work had come to an end. In the end, naturally nothing was found except for the group of fainted guests. Chi Jinkai pinched his eyebrows, an undercurrent surged in his eyes, and his face was cold, which was unreasonably frightening. Lu Qingran swallowed the question immediately. He glanced at the situation at the scene and asked Director Sun, "Have you found anything?" Director Sun shook his head and sighed, with a sad face, "No, the other party did it very cleanly." Bai Yuxiu then asked, "What about monitoring?" "Checking, but no results yet." The two of them were silent at the same time and looked at Chi Jinkai. Although his expression was normal, people familiar with him knew that this was a sign of his anger. "Third brother, don't worry too much." Lu Qingran sighed, stepped forward and patted Chi Jinkai on the shoulder, comforting him. The old man should be safe for the time being. The other party went to such great lengths to kidnap the two old men, which shows that these two men are valuable to them and they will not do anything to them for the time being. Chi Jinkai naturally knows this, otherwise, he would not be staying here now. He glanced at the scene, turned around and left, saying, "Follow me." Lu Qingran and Bai Yuxiu looked at each other, not sure why, but they still followed him. The three of them went upstairs to the Yun family's study. Chi Jinkai walked around in a circle, and then stopped in front of the floor-to-ceiling window with his hands in his pockets. Looking down from here, he could clearly see all the corners of the Yun family. It was a secret observation. Great place for people. He narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "Do you think there is a problem with the Yun family?" Hearing his question, Lu Qingran immediately frowned and asked, "Aren't they victims?" No trace of the Yun family was found at the scene. It was most likely that the other party took away the two old men and also abducted the Yun family. That's not right. Bai Yuxiu suddenly spoke up and denied what he said. He raised his head to look at Chi Jinkai and muttered, "There is another possibility that the Yun family is in the same group as that group of people." Lu Qingran's eyes suddenly widened. "What?" He thought calmly and decided something was wrong. Isn't this impossible? Although Mr. Yun and the two old men did not have much contact with each other, they were once one of the 5 major families. Their relationship was not too bad, and there was no reason to conspire with others to kidnap them. What's more, although the Yun family's status in the imperial capital is not as good as that of the Li family and the Qi family, it is still an upper-class wealthy family. Even his family has to respect him. How could he be so reluctant to involve the entire family? Chi Jinkai turned to look at him. Yun Xingyi is indeed not stupid enough to risk the entire Yun family with him, but what if the terms offered by the other party are more attractive than the entire Yun family? Lu Qingran was puzzled. What could that be? The Yun family has plenty of money and power, so what could make him risk everything so much? Bai Yuxiu thought deeply, squinted his eyes and said, "Could it be, Yun Rong?" He raised his head suddenly and caught a glimpse of Chi Jinkai nodding slightly. He suddenly understood, and a series of guesses in his mind were well founded. "What Yun Rong, what are you talking about?" Lu Qingran looked at Bai Yuxiu and Chi Jinkai, feeling a little crazy, thinking that they were deliberately teasing him. This kind of feeling of being kept in the dark is really heartbreaking. Bai Yuxiu explained to him, "You may not know much about it. Yun Xingyi's granddaughter has suffered from severe congenital heart disease since birth. She has been seeking medical treatment for so many years but with little effect. Some wealthy families are talking privately about the Yun family. My granddaughter has only a few years left to live." Lu Qingran, then what does this have to do with what happened this time? Bai Yuxiu was so stupid that he was so stupid. "You are stupid. If someone offers a condition and says that Yun Rong's disease can be cured, will Yun Xingyi, who loves his granddaughter as much as his life, agree to it?" End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 582. Chapter 568. None of your business. Lu Qingran's eyes widened. "So, what you are saying is that Yun Xingyi is very likely to be involved in kidnapping 2 old men for his granddaughter. He's crazy. More than these." Chi Jinkai took his time and dropped another bombshell. "I suspect that there is a supernatural organization behind this." The expressions of both of them changed at the same time, and their expressions became a little more solemn. "Bai Yuxiu, third brother, what do you say?" Chi Jinkai was not in a hurry to reply to him, but instead asked, "Has Mu Yu been rescued?" Mentioning Bai Mu, Bai Yuxiu's eyes suddenly flashed with an unnatural look, but it was only fleeting and no one noticed it. He laughed dryly, "It's okay, we got there in time, everyone is in the Special Administration Bureau now." Chi Jinkai hummed and said nothing, but narrowed his eyes slightly, not knowing what to think about. "Lu Qingran, third brother, why do you suddenly ask about this?" Chi Jinkai raised his eyes and looked at him, and said calmly, "Don't you think it's strange?" He walked slowly to the desk, his eyes fell on the various documents scattered on the table. He picked up a piece at random and glanced at it, then flipped it away, and the thin paper slipped from his hand and fell on the soft carpet. "Superior." Chi Jinkai raised his fingers and tapped the edge of the table, and said indifferently, Mu Yu's kidnapping and the accident with the two old men happened almost at the same time. He only said this and did not speculate too much. However, Bai Yuxiu's eyes suddenly tightened as if he was enlightened. Yes, if you say that, then things will make sense. Bai Yuxiu subconsciously clenched his fists and turned to look at Lu Qinggran. The other person obviously realized what was going on at this time, and his face suddenly became cold. He continued Qi Jingkai's words and speculated, the other party chose to kidnap people in an extremely conspicuous public place. It is expected that both the police and the Special Administration Bureau will attach great importance to it. Especially after it is confirmed that the kidnapper is not an ordinary person, the attention of the Special Administration Bureau will all focus on them, and the Bureau has limited manpower. While fully tracking the whereabouts of the kidnappers, monitoring of other places will be lax. Lu Qinggran took a deep breath and continued, at this time, whether it is to attack the two old men or to evacuate the imperial capital afterwards, it will be very easy. So, it turns out that what Hal Eileen said before actually meant this. Bai Yuxiu clenched his fists loudly, and there were faint veins popping out on his forehead. He took a deep breath to calm down, and then apologized to Qi Jingkai, I'm sorry, third brother, all this happened because of me. Qi Jingkai was confused and frowned, what? Bai Yuxiu paused and said, the people who kidnapped Xiao were from the Shaman League. Their second in command, Hal Eileen, is a shapeshifter and has infiltrated the Special Administration Bureau a long time ago. She discovered my identity. That's why I chose to attack Xiao, who is closest to me, in order to divert the Special Administration Bureau's attention. In order to investigate the apartment murder case, he often appeared in the Special Administration Bureau, and Xue Kong, who was disguised as Hal Eileen, was from the Secretariat. He met him many times, so he naturally knew the relationship between Director Sun and Zhou Ming. His attitude. In this way, if the people closest to him are kidnapped, the Special Administration Bureau will definitely invest more energy in solving the case. At that time, they will have more opportunities to take action. Bai Yuxiu never expected that Bai Mui's misfortunes were all caused by himself, and he also indirectly caused the accidents of the two old men. After thinking about all this, he couldn't help but blame himself even more. His eyes were dim and his face was extremely gloomy. Hearing what he said, Lu Qinggran became anxious, no, Lao Bai, how could you think so? It's not your fault. He stepped forward and slapped Bai Yuxiu on the shoulder. He was so anxious that he uttered obscenities, her mother, those grandsons are too dirty-minded and mean-spirited. Doesn't this have anything to do with you? Bai Yuxiu. Having said it all, can we not take action? Your internal organs will be photographed. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 583. Chapter 569 Detention Room or Guest Room. Lu Qinggran saw that his face suddenly turned dark, and he retracted his hand and laughed dryly, ahem, I mean, it's none of your business that the two old men are tied up, so don't think about it. Bai Yuxiu glanced at him lightly, then turned to Qi Jingkai, third brother, Hal Irene has been escorted back to the Special Administration Bureau. Why don't we interrogate him and her first, maybe we can find out something. Although he knew very well that Hal Eileen would not be able to spit out something important easily, there was no other way now. Nothing could be seen at the scene, so we could only check for clues from the surveillance, but it would be difficult to get results in a short period of time, and as time went by, the safety of the two old men would become less and less guaranteed. Qi Jingkai's eyes darkened and he nodded. However, at this time, someone had already jumped ahead of them and interrogated Hal Eileen first. 15 minutes ago, Zhou Ming and other team members brought Hal Eileen back to the Special Administration Bureau. Along with them, there was Bai Muiu. However, one was escorted out of the car, and the other was asked to get off. Cars. Although Bimweo's current level of suspicion is not much lower than that of Hal Eileen, since she just helped capture members of the Cha League and is also a victim, the suspicion on her can be temporarily cancelled. Moreover, she is Bai Yuxiu's sister after all. No matter how suspicious her identity is, they don't dare to use force directly like they did to Hal Eileen. Zhou Ming wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and smiled bitterly in his heart. The job assigned to him by team leader Bai was really difficult to do. Bring this little ancestor back to the bureau. What if she gets upset and dismantles the Special Administration Bureau? I don't know if the bureau's protection system can hold up. Thinking of this, Zhou Minghu's eyes moved slightly, and his eyes fell on Bimweow, who had just got out of the car, secretly observing her every move. Bimweow held the car door and raised her hand to block the dazzling sunlight. Now it was the time when the sun was at its strongest. She had been staying in the deep forest just now and was used to the dark environment. Suddenly she returned to the bright environment, feeling a little, slightly uncomfortable. Seeing her frowning, Zhou Ming's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately stepped forward with a smile and said, "Miss Bai, please come this way." Bimweow glanced at him, his expression unchanged, his tone extremely normal, and asked, "Are you going to the detention room?" Zhou Ming choked. Since he joined this industry, he has met many people with superpowers. Most of them were more or less nervous and hesitant after arriving at their Special Administration Bureau. This was the first time that she was so happy and contented. With a smile on his face, he said, "How can you? You are not a prisoner." Bimweow looked at him playfully and said, "But, my identity is unknown." The corners of her lips slowly raised a heart-stopping arc. "Captain Zhou, don't be afraid, I will do something detrimental to you." Zhou Ming was stared at by her, and he felt chills all over his body. The hairs on his back stood up on the spot. He was frozen in place, his pupils trembling slightly, and he couldn't say a word. Just when he felt that the air around him was freezing, Bimweow smiled, breaking the stagnant atmosphere. She took a step forward, patted his shoulder, and comforted him, "Don't worry, for my brother's sake, I won't do anything to you." Hearing this, Zhou Ming breathed a sigh of relief and said with a dry smile, "Miss Bai is really good at joking, haha." He rubbed the sweat from his hands and quickly invited Bimweow to stay in the reception room, arranged for female staff, and found an excuse to leave early. If he stays in front of her any longer, he will faint sooner or later, so it is better to sneak away first. Bimweow was sitting on the sofa in the reception room, with his legs crossed and a leisurely posture. He was holding the teacup and sipping it while looking at Zhou Ming's fleeing figure. Running away now? Psychological quality is a bit poor. She lowered her eyes and landed on the fragrant teacup, a smile flashed quickly in her eyes. "Madam, do you need anything else?" The female staff member stood beside her and asked respectfully. Bimweow curled up the corners of his lips and said, "It's not needed for the time being." "But dash." She took a sip of tea, cleared her throat, and said, "If Captain Zhou is done with his work later and is in a hurry, tell him that I have something to ask him." "Thank you." But she still wanted to ask him something. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 584. Chapter 570 President's Order. Zhou Ming, who thought he had escaped death, heard what Bimweow's person told him. "Hingba, there is no escape." He sighed bitterly and returned to the reception room as if resigned to his fate. Bimweow was drinking tea slowly. When he saw him, he raised his eyebrows and said in a playful tone, "Captain Zhou is finished so quickly." "Zhou Ming." He laughed dryly, there was nothing to do. Hearing this, Bimweow raised his eyebrows slightly and said nonchalantly, "Really? The old men of the Li and Qi families were kidnapped. I thought the entire Special Administration Bureau would be too busy, but I didn't expect Captain Zhou to be so free. Zhou Ming originally had a flattering smile on his face. When he heard these words, his expression suddenly changed. He looked at her with wide eyes and asked subconsciously, "How did you know?" He also received the notice on the way. Although he was shocked at the time, considering that she was there, he kept pretending that nothing happened. "When did she?" Baimui raised the corners of his lips slightly and said twice, "What I want to know, I will know naturally." Zhou Ming's eyes darkened slightly, and his tone was more serious. "What does Miss Bai want to know from me?" He thought Baimui called him over because of this matter, but the other party shook his head in surprise. "I don't want to know." The confusion in Zhou Ming's eyes deepened. If it wasn't for asking this, then what did she want to do? Baimui put down the teacup in his hand, stood up, looked directly at him, and said word by word, "I hope that I can interrogate Hal Eileen in person." "No." As soon as he finished speaking, Zhou Ming reflexively refused, so quickly that there was no room for consideration. A glimmer of light flashed across Baimui's eyes, and her expression was as calm as before, but Zhou Ming still noticed a hint of displeasure from the subtle changes in her eyes. He paused and then explained, "I'm sorry, Miss Bai, your identity has not been verified and you are still under suspicion. It is absolutely impossible for us to agree to this kind of thing, are all top-secret prisoners. Even he is not qualified to conduct private interrogations, let alone her whose identity has not been confirmed to be safe." Baimui said nothing and looked at him quietly with narrowed eyes. Just when Zhou Ming felt that the air around him was stagnant, he suddenly rolled his eyes and complained softly in a speechless tone, "I knew it would be like this. It's the rules of conduct for a regular unit like yours, sometimes it's really too rigid." Since she mumbled in a very low voice, he did not hear the next few words clearly, but he knew from her look that specify was not a good word. Baimui sighed, "Forget it." The next second, she reached for her waist, took out something from the storage ring, and threw it to him without hesitation. Zhou Ming's pupils trembled, and he caught it subconsciously. He opened his palm and saw that it was a worn-out wooden sign. It was very light and looked like a cheap plastic product, but its surface was covered with countless complex and ancient patterns. In the middle the handwriting has been worn away, but the word Qing can be vaguely discerned. "This is." The moment he recognized what it was, Zhou Ming's hand holding the wooden sign began to tremble non-stop, and the wooden sign lying quietly in his palm seemed as heavy as 1,000 pieces. This is." Zhou Ming's throat was choked up, and his mouth was so nervous that he couldn't say a word. His voice was tight and trembling, "Bai, Miss Bai, this is." Baimui chuckled, admiring his extremely nervous expression, and said slowly, "This is the president's order." Okay, he is not blind, nor does he admit his mistake. It is really the president's order. Zhou Ming swallowed hard and changed from holding the wooden sign with one hand to holding it respectfully with both hands. He felt as if he was on a rocket about to be launched into outer space. This is the legendary president's order. Meeting an order is like meeting the president. Any person or organization with powers who sees it must completely obey the holder's orders and must not disobey. He had only heard of it before, but he didn't expect to see the real thing. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 585. Chapter 571. You are here. Zhou Ming could hardly control his excitement. Just when he didn't know what expression to put on, Baimui said with a smile in his voice, "Captain Zhou, am I qualified to judge people now?" Zhou Ming's expression froze and he paused in embarrassment. "It naturally exists, absolutely. According to regulations, the president's order can only be granted by the president himself. It is of great significance and cannot be easily revealed to others unless it is an emergency. Yet she actually threw the president's order to him so casually and ignored it so much. The only people inside are probably the president's close confidants. Zhou Ming felt annoyed. He was holding such a hot potato in his hand. He couldn't put it down or continue holding it. He wanted to find a crack in the ground to get in and disappear in front of Bimwu. Since he is a close confidant of the president, he must be above them in status, so how could he be detrimental to the Special Administration Bureau? It was really a flood that washed away the Dragon King Temple, and one family no longer knew the other. He smiled sarcastically twice and handed the commander's order back. His attitude immediately changed compared to before. Of course, Miss Bai, I was disrespectful earlier, so I hope Haihan will do it. He had previously suspected that she had impure motives because she had not registered her identity with the Bureau. Now it seemed that there was no need for her to register with them. It's because they don't deserve it. Thinking of this, the wry smile on Zhou Ming's lips couldn't help but deepen. It doesn't matter, you just follow the routine. Bimwu took back the token and shook his head in amusement upon hearing this. He just had reasonable doubts about her identity and had done nothing wrong. On the contrary, it was her who, in order to pry something out of Hal Alin's mouth as quickly as possible, he doesn't hesitate to use his authority to coerce him. There is really no limit to him. I think back then, although the president's original intention of giving them the order was to allow them to act more conveniently, she used it to coerce and bribe a team leader of the Special Administration Bureau. I'm afraid if he knew about it, he would be to death. Imagining the scene of Zhongqing being angry to death, Bimwu twitched the corner of her mouth. For some reason, the scene actually made her want to laugh. Since there were still people around, she suppressed her smile in time, calmed down her expression, and coughed lightly. Then please make arrangements. I will interrogate Hal Ailin now. Zhou Ming put his heels together, straightened his back, and faced she saluted. Yes. I'll go right away. After saying that, he immediately ordered his subordinates to take Hal Ailin out of the detention room. When they arrived, what they saw was Hal Ailin with his hands cuffed on the table, staring at something in a daze with a calm expression, without a trace of panic or struggle, and he was so calm that he was not normal. She was placed alone in a small room with one-way glass on all sides. She could not see anything outside from the inside, but she could have a clear view of the inside from the outside. This was to facilitate them to better monitor the prisoners. Purpose-built interrogation room. In addition, this interrogation room also has the function of shielding mental power and superpowers. No matter how high the level of superpowers are, as long as they are within the scope of this interrogation room, they will become ordinary people and have no ability to resist. They observed Hal Ailin from the monitoring room for a while. During this period, her posture and expression did not even change. Zhou Ming asked in confusion, Miss Bai, is she? Bimwu looked at her through the one-way glass. Suddenly, she snorted coldly, she's waiting for me. Ah! Zhou Ming was startled. He looked at Hal Ailin and then looked back at her. He didn't find anything unusual. How could she guess it? Bimwu did not reply to him. He glanced around and asked, has the mental shield been blocked? It's always open. Ever since Hal Ailin was escorted back, not only the interrogation room, but also the mental shielding system in the entire Special Administration Bureau was turned on, just in case. Bimwu hummed lightly without saying anything. He turned around and opened the door between the monitoring room and the interrogation room and walked in. Hal Ailin, who was sitting in a chair in a daze, heard the movement and slowly raised his eyes. When he saw that the person coming was her, he suddenly showed a sinister smile, and his voice was full of weird laughter. You came. End of this chapter.